Hi, welcome. My name is McCluskey, and on this video, I'm going to be talking about the language of the method. Okay, I'm going to be talking about this very unique, one-of-a-kind, interaction-based approach. And again, to understand how the system of training changes perceptions of dogs based again on dogs, how they connect with us as social animals. Okay, so this ties into the role of influence. Understand there's so much confusion about, let's call it physical force, discipline, punishment, certain tools. But again, the way to look at those things is how they connect by way of how we're perceived by way of relationship. Okay, it's no different. This is why, again, I talk about the parenting example, a lot of my videos to help with creating a foundation of understanding. Okay, so again, everything I talk about, just consider the parenting example. Once, okay, you're dealing with a situation, a relationship problem between a parent and a already selfish child, it changes everything, especially again when you're trying to apply a certain idea, okay, by way of this very popular idea that training's a learning-based exercise, okay, and again, in a very superficial way, generating or motivating a series of responses and attempting to focus in on those responses as representing some sort of a standard, okay, by way of how that picture is being painted, to try to lead into suggesting that that represents that perceptions are changing or the relationship is getting better. But again, consider the current state of the relationship, again, in terms of current state of relationship, in terms of how you're perceived, okay? But again, if you decide to jump in that way, like, minute one into a relationship problem, say with a selfish child, an already selfish child, and simply pull out the Xbox game or things the child desires and get them to do good responses by way of making their bed, picking up their toys, consider the things that would represent good responses, but what's absent, okay, and just think about this, is again being in the child's airspace, okay, differently based again on establishing parental influence. And again, think about that word influence, because talk about that a little bit. This will lead into this interaction-based methodology, understanding it in terms of how it connects to change perceptions, the role of influence, how that ties in. But again, consider the parenting example in terms of being dialed in, okay, invested, engaged, okay, recognizing, okay, a relationship problem, how truth is revealed, and that's one of the big things in terms of what's revealed, okay, in the relationship. How is that revealed? And that's the other question. Again, I use the example of, of putting a demand on the child to take the garbage out because I'm the parent, okay, and it's a reasonable demand versus, we'll take the garbage out and here's $100, okay? Talk about the issue of bribery. When does using a motivator become bribery or take that path? Well, it's based on how you perceive it. It's based on the current state of the relationship, the path that follows. So, consider that versus, okay, putting a demand on the child as a parent, parental influence, take the garbage out because, hey, I'm the parent, it's a reasonable demand, but that's when truth is typically going to be revealed through certain interactions like that, where the child now is going to really challenge that, perhaps have a major meltdown, a fit. But again, consider, again, talk about dogs as social animals, consider what's revealed through as influence as you're interacting certain ways. Again, the leash is a good example of that. If you're trying to walk your dog on the leash, bring the dog under control and leadership in a very specific way, you'll start to see that level of challenge, okay, rise up, okay, versus following a path of accommodation and negotiation, allowing the dog to walk out in front of you. It might seem better because you're following that type of path of accommodation, but it's not better at all. Okay, so the whole context of fulfillment, comfort, okay, appearances, right? That gets us into a lot of trouble because it's no different than you could, bribe or negotiate a selfish child to accept a certain, situation to, interact, say, with their peers but typically they wouldn't now, because now they're really selfish and they have certain ideas about sharing. But you're quarterbacking, okay, the child to get them to, based on your parenting style, right, based on your idea of things, you're negotiating, you're engaging that way to get the child to accept a certain situation, and then you're trying to present that as representative that the relationship's getting better based on a certain moment, okay, and then it's really not, okay. You've just bribed your way through a certain situation. But so think about certain concepts such as counter conditioning, okay, the context of agreeableness, okay, it's the same thing, so again, this all leads into, okay, why, okay, you want to focus in on an interaction-based approach, because again, it's about what's revealed. It's very similar about being in the airspace, okay, of a dog that's already gained a level of control. So again, reconciling behavioral issues by way of, as a dog gains more and more control in the relationship, behavioral issues escalate. But again, tying this into the language of the actual method, and again, specific interactions. Okay, understand that this methodology is based on specific interactions that the dog comes into agreement with. Okay, that's the whole premise. Just like interacting with a child in specific ways that a child comes into agreement with. Okay, so how that ties in. Okay, but in terms of approaching training as a type of intervention. Okay, that's the way to see really training is based on a relationship problem. It's about connecting dots properly. So, so the type of interaction, this interaction based, kind of agreement. So understand it's not erratic. Okay, understand that this is turning it into a type of power play situation, which it needs to be. Okay, understand it needs to be a type of power play because influence now needs to be part of the equation. Okay, so it's about how you're connecting with your dog, how you're interacting through the leash, okay, how you're bringing a dog into a level of control through how you're interacting. But understand it's a very specific language, okay? Therefore, if you look at, how you interact, say, in terms of, say, maybe a different, methodology or how people interact, there's a big difference between a intentional interaction-based method or a erratic, okay? Which means that you're moving certain ways where the dog, you're basically creating as a power play, but now you're going to create a war with the dog because you're escalating it, okay? It's turned into a power play, but now it's not going to make sense to the dog because through this methodology, you're moving the same way each time, okay? If you see how I'm doing the method with the sit, the push-pull, the nudging, then I'm taking one step, and I'm repeating the sequence, so it's happening over and over and over again. And a dog, okay, starts to make sense of this, okay, because it's very intentional, very specific, okay, lines up a certain way versus erratic, okay. So if you're moving erratically with a dog, that's not the same thing, okay. You're not going to get the right information, okay. It's going to, bring it into a highly challenging situation where someone could get bitten very quickly. That's why certain interactions when you're trying to pin a dog, starting to do certain things, and then you're tying it into, say, a bribery-based methodology, it just isn't going to line up because it's, there's a big gap there, right? It's like saying the dog's saying, well, this doesn't make sense. Okay, this person is not interacting in such a way, connecting with me in such a way to change, okay, how the dog perceives you, and then you're interacting at other times, which represents more being upset, or you're having certain moments with the dog, and it just doesn't line up. Okay, understand? So this is very specific, and so it is about influence. Understand that influence is, needed. Okay, you look at again this idea about corrections and discipline, but then what's popular, how that ties in, say, through balance training. It's like walking in between two parenting styles, permissive and authoritative. It doesn't make sense because you're walking the fence, okay? So you're aligned with, or you're in agreement with, assuming that certain responses are representative, that the perceptions are changing, but then because you're superficially motivating dogs, it's, the state of mind of the dog, it doesn't represent a like-minded state, so to speak, in terms of appearances. The dog could be doing a sit and look fantastic, but the perceptions aren't changing the way that you think that they are because of how the path you're following that way, how you're just like the selfish child. You can have them make their bed and do all sorts of things. Doesn't mean just because they're responding a certain way doesn't mean that their perceptions of the parents changing. Okay, if you're not dialed in, invested, interacting the way that, again, as a parent, okay, knowing that in terms of, you know, creating meaningful change, okay, that's really important. So it's very similar. So, and the outcomes are very similar too, okay. But again, it's all about being in the airspace different. But again, understand the role of influence. So influence, okay, intersex is part of these interactions, okay. You're bringing a dog under level of not just control, but asserting influence, that language, okay, how it's speaking through that, about how it's changing perception of dogs, because it is now a power play. But again, it's very intentional methodology. So, you know, there's certain variances where if I know that I'm dealing with a dog that has gained a high level of control, okay, I'll make certain adjustments, okay. It's just not, even though I'm starting to move forward or starting to do, say, the one-step method, you know, I'm going to maybe really be very, very intentional, more so, because even though what I do can be perceived as being reasonable, okay, the dog's going to still go into a high challenge state. You know, I could still get bitten, okay, because that dog is holding so much control, okay, and because now it is a type of power play, I have to kind of really, you know, take my time and not be rushed to, you know, move too quickly through it, because there is that type of transition where it's no different in the way to look at it. It'd be like a child that's become very, very selfish to the point of almost violence, okay, it's gotten way out of control, and it'd be like a parent coming into the bedroom with a child, say, you know, overly invested in video games, just starting to rip the video game system out of the wall, okay, you know, you're going to be in high conflict, okay, versus going in, starting to have a conversation, but not bribery based, but not negotiation, but starting to have a conversation to say, okay, this is the expectation, okay, starting to get dialed in, starting to interact, starting to put restrictions on certain things, say, okay, we'll have a conversation about the video game system, okay, we're going to bring it into proper, you make certain adjustments because you're moving towards a healthy relationship, okay, certain expectation that needs to be set up because you're the parent, okay, and even though the child doesn't like it, they have to be more agreeable to it, okay, if you do it in a reasonable way, okay, understands about reasonableness. But here's the other thing, is the issue about the contrast here, and this can be very challenging for people when they look at certain responses of dogs. They'll go into a certain level of challenge based on a specific interaction. They're looking at cause and effect. It's very difficult sometimes for people to reconcile those responses, because perhaps what they're in agreement with in terms of a bribery-based type of approach, right, and they're not, you know, aligned properly in terms of reconciling certain things, they'll look at that and they'll think it's physical. The dog is, there's something physically happening to the dog that's causing the dog to react that way, versus relationship. And again, consider the parenting example. You have a child rolling around the floor having a major meltdown, a major fit, because the parent said the word no, okay? And you're looking at that saying, well, the parent must have hit the child, must have did something physically abusive to the child. And that's not the case many times, often at all, okay? It's the fact of what was triggered and what, you know, what sent the child into having a major meltdown and temper tantrum is the fact that things were already out of control. The relationship was already off course. The child had a certain idea of things, right, based on the fact that they thought that they were in control, and things escalated just because the word no was used, okay? So it's about depth. Understand, it's about having that insight to understand that being able to reconcile through relationship a certain response, so that you can, the reason I'm saying this, so you can move beyond that, okay? So you can put that, reconcile and say, okay, you still check certain things. You'll say, okay, I want to check, make sure the caller, because again, that could be the case where, but oftentimes if you're following the right methodology, and you know, no, it's physiological, okay? It's mind and body. It's not just about the physical, okay? It's all connected. So it's depth of relationship. So just understand that, because that's very important, because you know, when people have a certain view of things, they're going to stop, and it's going to really cause them to get upset, okay? And then what happens is things escalate from there, and you never get the relationship resolved, okay? Because you're not able to move beyond that stuff. and keeps you in a weak position. So this is where, again, you make certain adjustments, but you have to be able to move beyond that. You have to be able to follow the right methodology and understand and reconcile those responses. And then as the dog comes into more and more agreement, right, you'll see the change happening. Things start to become very, start to change very quickly. And then you start to be able to look back on that stuff to say, okay, now I understand, what happened. So just like the parent, again, everything I say on my videos, think about the parenting example. I mean, everything. It's be so helpful, because as a parent, you'll start to get it. Say, okay, that makes sense. So again, my encouragement to people is, think about, why a interaction-based approach is very important, how it reconciles, speaks the right language, that reconciles influence. Okay, we have certain ideas of things, but this is where, again, because the system, these interactions are proactive. Okay, this is the whole dialed-in thing. The issue about influence being proactive in such a way, the dog is going to be in more agreement, because you're not waiting. You're not reactive. You're not taking a reactive posture. You're taking a proactive approach. Okay, so that's another big dynamic in this, is that you already know how you're perceived, because you're revealing at the very beginning. That's why you get a dog on the leash and you're bring the dog into specific interactions. The truth will be revealed. Okay, versus off leash, using treats. Okay, launching in that way. The truth isn't going to be revealed. You're going to be led into basically being deceived. Okay, whether intentionally or not, you're going to be assuming certain things because you're just looking at responses. So influence has to be part of it for the truth to be revealed, but also for change to happen. Understand, it's both. Okay, it's both, and that gives you the information as you move forward too, getting feedback through these interactions as to change as it's happening. Because again, the methodology starts to diminish over time as perceptions of dogs change. So again, understand, it's all about the language of the method. It's very important. Certain themes here you want to keep in mind as you move forward. But again, it's all about understanding this interaction-based methodology, how it changes perceptions of dogs in a very intentional way. Thanks for watching.